Hey everybody, welcome back to this Ocean Life podcast. Thanks for being here. I'm your host, Josh Peterson. Today's episode number 91. I speak with Andy Schell and Mia Karlsson, owners and operators of 59 North, an offshore sailing adventure company operating in the Atlantic Ocean. Now today, Andy and Mia tell their story of founding the company based on their love for sailing, the challenges they faced building a business of taking guests or crew with different levels of sailing experience out to sea for extended periods of time, and telling their own stories of respective backgrounds in the ocean. Andy and Mia share stories from the various routes they take on their trips, from transatlantic crossings to northern passages past Norway up into the ice. We hear the gear required, how they structure their crew during a voyage, and the special times they share with their crew at sea, helping others learn the love of sailing and the open ocean. And Andy and Mia touch on the special connection that we all share with the ocean and relate specific stories of their own spiritual interactions with animals at sea. So a lot of neat stuff about open ocean sailing and really introducing and helping others learn the love of the ocean and sailing. Hope everybody is enjoying the last throes of summer here in the Northern Hemisphere. And as always, reducing our use of plastics, picking up some trash, and just doing some good stuff for the ocean. Thanks again for being here. Now, let's get into the ocean life of Andy Schell and Mia Karlsson. So, a little back home on the farm in Sweden. I mean, how's that feel after, I guess, like a consistent, steady stream of time on the water for you guys?
It's great. You know, the farm for us, it's been in Mia's family for like 100 years. So that's really cool to have that history with it. And it's just a nice place to sort of unwind. We were on the boat this time since the end of December. So like a solid 7 months. Yeah. So it's, you know, I don't think either of us could do full-time one or the other. Like I think I'd go crazy if I was full-time on the farm.
Yeah.
But I'd also go crazy if I was full-time on the boat. So it's all about the balance for us. And it's been a overly busy year this year because we got a second boat. But it is really nice. I've been home a month. I already feel recharged. I've got another month to go. So it's a great place to come back to recharge and kind of just hang out. And we were just showing some people around the house just 20 minutes ago. And this is a place where like we're pretty much isolated, which is a good thing for our lifestyle. But if we had to like commute into Stockholm or something, that'd be a huge pain in the butt. But given that we're not really, we don't have to be anywhere when we're home. We're working on the computer and remotely. It's a really nice place to hang out. So it's
that's killer. It's nice to have that kind of getaway. So Mia, is this like the place where you grew up? And second question, I guess, is it like kind of near the water? So it was like this kind of family retreat and entry point into the ocean for you?
Actually not. It is in my family, and I grew up around this area. My parents live just a few kilometers away, but ironically, it's farmland around. It's no water. The closest water is like 20 minutes away, so we can't go for our morning swims as we usually like to do on the boat. But on the other hand, it's kind of nice because it really makes you want the water when you've been here for a while.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah. Nice. All right. So as you guys are mentioning, you're chilling, you're some downtime on the farm, getting off the water. Now, being on the water for you guys is you have this, and I've been spending a lot of time looking at it, and it's just awesome. I mean, first, the content you guys put out and the way you keep people engaged with what you're doing with 59 North Sailing, which we'll dive into. I mean, you have a podcast, you have a blog, you have just so many pictures. It's in passages. I mean, I just got lost in it last night. I spent like almost 2 hours. It's killer. But give us like a summary. I mean, high level it. Just first, what is 59 North? What are you two doing? And then we'll kind of work backwards into how it all got started.
Our overarching philosophy is sharing the wisdom of the high seas with those wise enough to seek it out. And I get very philosophical about this stuff. And obviously, our business model is we want to get people to come sailing with us. That's how we make a living on one of our two boats. But beyond that, we're trying to inspire people to get out there and do things on their own. I mean, the gist of my podcast, like the overarching theme of the podcast that I do, is trying to figure out, a lot of people have dreams, but what makes the ones that follow through on those dreams, what makes them different from the other people that don't?
Yeah.
And that's what I'm trying to inspire through my podcast, through Instagrams, through the blog, everything else. And the point I made before we lost connection there was that it would be way too much work if it was just a job. And it is truly our passion. Like I do this because I love it and want to inspire other people. And it's turned into a business, and that's, that was on purpose. But it is really, really, we're truly following, I feel like, what I was meant to be doing.
Yeah, that's really awesome, man. I mean, because and it's a cool theme that I've had on in various capacities, different people on the podcast doing different things, trying to pursue their passion. And some, like you guys, have found it; others are on their way. But what's so rad is, while you're able to, it's like a 3-for-1. I'd kind of say for you guys. One is you have a thriving business, and that's really great. We need to make money to live. That's just how it is. 2, you're doing something that personally fulfills you by being on the water, because there's that aspect. But then 3 is you're also inspiring others. I mean, I think that's just awesome how you've been able to nail that. And I mean, while it's a job, it's also like you probably get up in the morning and not even look at it as a job. I mean, you just love doing it.
No, it's not. And it doesn't feel like a job. And
Yeah.
I'm inherently I think I'm a pretty lazy guy, and I have a hard time working hard for something I don't believe in. But at the same time, I have a very easy time putting in the work that's required to do what I'm truly passionate about. And like I said, it is the sailing, especially when we're on the boat, it's full on 24/7. I mean, it's even a short stint, 4 or 5 months is just, it takes it out of you, and it's a lot of pressure, and there's a lot of responsibility and all the other stuff. And I love it. I really, truly love it. But you couldn't do it if it was just a job. It would be just overwhelming.
That's way cool. So now talk, if you would, about the setup today. You started with one boat, you have 2, and you're operating on either sides of the Atlantic. So give us that kind of summary of describe the boats, because they're different boats, kind of serving the same purpose, and then the different areas they're operating in today.
Yeah, so we have a Swan 48. That's both boats are Swans. One's a 48, one's a 59. They're both built in Finland. And we started the business with the 48 back in 2015. And the Atlantic Ocean has become sort of that's the North Atlantic specifically is where we're most comfortable. So it just depends. Both boats happen to be on the Chesapeake Bay right now. Annapolis, Maryland is where I grew up sailing out of there. So that's kind of our de facto home port, and the season ended for both boats there this year. And next year they're both going to go across the Atlantic to Europe, but via different routes. Mia and I will take the big boat north to Newfoundland and then across to Ireland, and that'll be retracing a route that we originally sailed on our first Atlantic crossing back in 2011, when it was just Mia and I and a friend on our first boat before we had a business. So we're kind of retracing that route, and then Eastbjorn, the 48, is going to go with her new skipper and mate via Bermuda, the Azores, and then on up to Scotland and Norway. And her skipper is Norwegian now, so he's going to be sailing her to his home port in Bergen on the west coast of Norway. So it'll just, as we go forward, it's at the moment the Atlantic. I don't mean to sound cocky about this, but we've gotten we've gotten comfortable in the Atlantic. It's we logistically, we know where the good harbors are. We know how to fly in and out when we leave the boat between seasons. It's become a lot easier logistically to plan seasons in the Atlantic. I know the weather. I'm really comfortable with the weather patterns and that kind of stuff. So that's where the next 2 or 3 years are going to take place, basically from the Caribbean all the way up to the Arctic in Spitsbergen, where we were last year. But that feels like our backyard almost, and is where I'm most comfortable. But going forward, I mean, we've got the Earth is 70% ocean, and it's all open, and we want to do it all. I mean, Mia and I met in New Zealand, and it's been a dream of ours to sail back there. We haven't been back since. Yeah. So it's all on the table, which is exciting and scary at the same time.
Heck yeah. I mean, I was thinking about this too from the perspective of, it's one thing for you two to sail together. It's a totally different thing to add people who are basically paying clients who, with, I'm guessing, a wide range of experience on the water, experience sailing, comfortability in heavy conditions and everything. And so that the familiarity that you guys have found in these routes where you know the good anchorages, you know where to run from weather, you know the weather patterns, there's a bit more predictability, though nothing's predictable about the ocean. But the idea of you taking clients out along these routes and that familiarity has got to be key. So talk about that. I mean, the different the spectrum of clients that you take out, some super seasoned and salty, I'm guessing, and others maybe not. I mean, what's that like?
Yeah, first of all, it's just a small thing, but I like to call them crew instead of clients, because clients, it just feels too businessy to me. Like I feel like what we do, yes, I make a living doing it, but it's not, it's hardly a business in that sense. And I call them crew specifically because they're not they're not on board the boat as passive, passengers.
Mm.
They are, the whole reason they come with us is because they get to actively participate in the sailing of the boat. And I
Okay.
see myself, I joke that I've got the softest hands of the crew because I don't do anything. And the best trips are when I take a back seat and act more as a conductor than anything else, and everybody else being hands-on, and I'm making sure that they're doing things right and not hurting themselves, not breaking the boat, number one. But that's what people are there for. They want to get the experience. And ironically, we sit down and chat before each passage and ask people what their individual goals are for each trip. And almost to a person, they say they want to experience heavy weather offshore in a quote unquote controlled environment. Mia and I being the control. And I always laugh and be like, trust me, like you can't get off. Once it starts, you have to deal with it. That's it. You can't say, okay, I've experienced it, turn it off now. It doesn't work that way.
Right.
But that's the thing. I'm gonna pass the mic over to Mia and kind of let her talk about the diversity, because we have a very diverse crew that sails with us, both ages and experience and everything. So Mia, you want to take that one?
Awesome.
Yeah, it's really neat. We had, excuse me, on the trip this year, we had both the youngest and the oldest person on the same trip. And the youngest one was a girl who was 21, just finished college. And the oldest guy is a guy who we sailed with many times, and he's 79. So that was pretty cool to see the difference in between the ages and how everyone worked together as a group. But most people who come sailing with us are either people who don't have a boat themselves, or they may have a boat that is not ready for the ocean, and they like to go sailing in the ocean to different places. So they usually come back with us maybe once a year, every second year, because they know they're not going to they're basically getting their sailing fix coming sailing with us.
Right.
And then we also have people who are planning to do this on their own, maybe have a 5-year plan of either having a boat or getting a boat to go long distance cruising, and they want to test it out before they basically take the big step to do it. One, do I like it, and two, gain a little bit of experience. So that's pretty cool. And then often I love to follow everyone after the trip and stay in touch. And a lot of people who sail with us have gotten their own boats and are currently out cruising, and that's really cool because, like Andy said in the beginning, it's all about inspire people, and if we can inspire them to take the step to go cruising on their own, that's just really cool, I think.
Oh, that's awesome. It really is. I mean, you're doing 2 for 1. I mean, one, I'm guessing there's some people who it's like a bucket list to do some of the passages with you. And I'd say bucket list is like, transatlantic for sure. Then there's others who it's a bucket list and it's like a stepping stone, being in a comfortable environment with people like you who know, and, they're learning, and they're experiencing it in a semi-controlled environment, as you said. Do you guys see a different, I'm just curious, like, and maybe I'm totally off base, but there's the folks who want to do maybe shorter passages, like maybe those are like the week-long 10 days. And then there's folks who want to do transatlantic. I see those as 2 very different types of beasts, kind of, those different passages. Is that true? And do you see a different type of crew or different type of person signing up for the transatlantic versus just maybe, a north to south run along the East Coast or something?
I actually think that it's kind of the same people who come sailing with us all the time. It's just depending. I think some people have more time on their hand and other people have less time. And the people who have more time can sign up for a longer trip. But I find that we have the same kind of people on every trip. What do you think, Andy?
Yeah, I would agree with that. I mean, to kind of make it a little bit more big picture, the people that have the best experiences, I would say, and who are the easiest to work with are the ones, regardless of their sailing experience, they come without any ego, because every boat is different and every skipper has different ways of doing things, and some ways are, some things there are capital right ways of doing things, but other things there's not one right way to do it. But where I was going with this is the people that think they know everything but really don't, they're the worst people to work with, and they're the hardest because, for example, our crew, they stand watch. We're sailing 24/7, so you're on a 4 hours on, 8 hours off watch rotation, and Mia or myself is always awake at the changeover. But if everything's going smoothly, we might have 2 crew basically sailing the boat while Mia and I are both asleep. And I'll never be able to get a good night's sleep unless I know the crew outside is going to wake me up if they have any questions about anything.
Yeah.
And that's really important. You know, when you have this dynamic on board the boat at sea, you got to work as a team, and part of that teamwork is making sure that if there's any doubt at all, that you wake up the skipper so that I can come up and you know, solve a debate if two crew have different ideas about things, whatever. So the people with the least egos do the best. But I do want to share a story about one of my favorite crew that's ever sailed with us. One of the most interesting. He was a guy who had recently retired. I think he was about 62 when he sailed with us. He was a rancher in Texas, and I guess raised cattle or something. And he had this real slow southern drawl. And when you talk to him, you got this very stereotypical impression in your head of this kind of slow moving southern Texas guy. And when we met him, he had a plan to travel around the world by land and by sea. And he was not a sailor, and he called us up. He was one of the very few people that actually call before they book with us. We're very lucky in that we get people that just listen to the podcast for years and they just sign up.
Yeah.
But anyway, this guy, Mac, his name was Kevin McMahon, called himself Mac. He called us like maybe a year before the trip was going to happen and said, hey, I'm planning this trip, and I've made certain rules for myself about this adventure. And one of my rules is that I have to cross an ocean by a sailboat. Otherwise, I can't say that I've gone around the world by land and sea unless I actually sail across an ocean. He's like, will you take me? And I said, absolutely. That sounds awesome. So he came up, he took like 1 or 2 sailing lessons just, you know, on a lake in Texas or something. And he walked out of his backyard in Texas, hitchhiked his way to the Amtrak station, took the train to New York City, jumped on a cruise ship to go to Bermuda. And it was one of the few ships that would allow him to get off the ship in Bermuda, because most go out and back again. Got off the ship in Bermuda, met us in Bermuda, sailed all the way across to the Azores with us, rejoined the boat, spent some time exploring the Azores on his own, rejoined the boat like 10 days later, sailed up to Scotland with us, took the train down to France and all the way up to Stockholm, and then took the Trans-Siberian Railroad to Asia, took another cruise ship to Western Australia, took the train across the outback and all the way across Australia, and then booked passage on a container ship from Sydney back to Los Angeles, where he got on another train and went back to Texas. So it was a hell of a trip that he did.
That is so epic.
And I love it that he said, you know what, this isn't going to count unless I sail across an ocean. That was like, yeah, man, that's great.
Yeah, that's cool. So in that example, right? So here's a guy who's kind of landlocked. He took a couple of sailing courses on a lake, and maybe there was like in 12-foot sunfish boats or something, right? And then he's going to jump on your boat sailing across the Atlantic. So how do you position, or what kind of duties do you assign a guy like that versus maybe somebody who's had their own boat for 10 years, you know, a different sort of level of sailor? How do you decide, you know, what that person should do?
It's less to do with their experience, because again, back to that ego thing, like Mac was great because he was a blank slate, and he was he was really smart and really learned quickly. So, you know, by the second trip, or by the middle of that first trip, I mean, he was really good at everything. You tell him something once and he'd remember it and know it. And then by the second leg, you know, all of a sudden he was the most experienced of the crew because he had just sailed 2,000 miles with us. So he kind of got promoted on the second leg. He was like in charge of foredeck work, which is kind of the most dangerous work on board, going up forward at sea and doing spinnaker work and stuff. But he was great because he was a blank slate. And to answer your question, I don't assign roles based on experience. I basically assign them based on the situation. It's very circumstantial. So, for example, if we have a particularly rough day and somebody needs to go on the bow to do something, I'm going to pick the fittest crew member because they're the ones that I think are least likely to fall overboard, because they're going to be able to maintain their balance and aware of their own surroundings and stuff like that. So it's really circumstance based. On the other hand, you know, Mac was probably quicker to wake me up in the middle of the night, because if we had a crossing situation with a ship, for example, that's really hard to judge in the middle of the night.
Yeah.
But that's the point. I want to be woken up in those situations to make sure that it doesn't get to be too close of a call. So that's kind of how I never, and we always pair people up on watches, not based on skill level, but rather on personality, because that's the most important thing. You're in a small space for a long time, just you and one other person. You better get along with each other. And the simplest way we do it is we always put 2 people on watch, And the two people who talk the most, they go together, and the two people who talk the least, they go together. Because there's nothing worse than putting an introvert with an extrovert and having the extrovert talk the other guy's ear off for 4 hours.
Yeah, I'm sure you've learned that maybe the hard way and over time, gotten good yourselves at like reading the people who are coming on your crew and then being able to pair up accordingly. I'm sure then because that'll, I mean, as you know, will also help make or break an experience for somebody is being with people who they kind of jive with.
Exactly. I mean, I like to compare what we do is really, crossing an ocean in a small sailboat is as close as an average person's going to get to space travel. And I really like that analogy. And it's the same thing. I just finished reading a book about Apollo 8, and it talked about, the guys in that capsule, they had to get along with each other, and they were teamed up a lot based on personalities. And, people ask us right on our frequently asked questions page on the website. The first one up there is, how do you know I'm going to get along with the other people? And the answer is you have to.
Yeah. Don't have much choice. Yeah, no, that's all good, man. One thing too, and kind of switching gears more towards the passages and the routes you guys take, and there's a sense of familiarity for you both in the Atlantic, and I'm looking at on the really again your great website 59-north.com, and we'll put a link to it for people to check out. There's a lot of variety there. There's some really cold stuff at the top of the world, and there's some stuff a little lower, a little warmer, so. For you two, do you have a favorite passage or a favorite route that the both of you really love the most?
Last summer we went up to Svalbard, which is north of Norway. We went all the way up to 80 degrees north, and that was, of course, like a very special trip. But that took a little bit of energy. So we're trying to balance the trips by doing more adventurous and new places with places that we feel familiar with. So after the summer up in Svalbard, it felt really good to go back to some place that we already knew, just to kind of make it easy. So we're trying to balance it to like pick the best of two worlds, find new places that we're gonna like, and also go back to places that we really like. And the favorite, I think, is up Nova Scotia, Newfoundland is my favorites. I love being up when it gets colder. I like this colder sailing. Right. I always think, when I'm sitting back home, I always think I'm gonna like the Caribbean. But then when I get there, it's so damn hot that I can't even do anything. So then I was like, what did I think? Like, yeah, it's beautiful here, but I can't do anything. So, and every time when we're like starting to sail north, I feel like I'm gaining energy by every degree it gets colder. And then I'm kind of getting into my comfort zone when it's like around 20 degrees Celsius. So that's kind of how I work. How about you, Andy?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, the favorites, I would have said exactly what Mia said about the balance, but the Azores is one of a special destinations. That's one of those places where we've been there twice now by boat, and it's kind of one of those classic landfalls where I actually wrote an article about this, where it almost doesn't, if you're a sailor, it almost doesn't count going to the Azores unless you've sailed there. Like that's one of those places you have to earn it. Like there's a bar in Horta called Peter Cafe Sport, and it's a world famous sailor's watering hole. And like, yeah, you can fly there and you can charter a boat out of Horta and do a vacation there. But you would, if you're a true sailor, you wouldn't necessarily want to tell your friends that you did that, because it's just like, it doesn't count. But it's one of those, it feels so much better to have spent 12 days at sea through the ups and downs. And then you get there and you're sleep deprived, but you're at the dock, you're safe, you can finally relax. And you go up and you have a beer and you reminisce with all the other hundreds of boats that also experience the same thing you did. You get there, you get this community aspect at places like that, at these classic landfalls that you have to earn. And that's one of them for sure.
Right. Yeah, that's awesome, man. And that's a neat thing about, there's a lot of different, there's parallels to that sense of community in many different sports in the ocean, and a lot of different folks I have on, whether you're paddling or big wave surfing, there's like a community globally that for the most part you can sit down and bump into somebody who's active in what you're doing and find that familiarity with them. And I can imagine the same thing. And so with you guys going to, not the same ports, but, similar anchorages again, the ports, et cetera, do you have like a little, network of friends and all kind of pockmarked around, both edges of the Atlantic? Like you could pull up to this anchorage, or I'm sorry, that port, and pop in and see somebody there, and then go 400 miles south and do the same somewhere else?
Yeah, we actually do. It's really cool. I mean, it's one of the upsides and the downsides of this lifestyle is we have so many close friends that we see once a year, if that.
Yeah.
And in all over the place. I mean, we sailed into Bermuda earlier this year, and it was one of the first trips where both boats were sailing together. And we sailed into Bermuda. Both boats were there, and just Bermuda is one of those crossroads in the Atlantic as well. You get a lot of boats that stop there on the way north from the Caribbean, heading back to like New England or the Chesapeake. But then you also get a lot of European boats that call there on their way to the Azores and then on to Europe. So we at once there was like half a dozen boats in the harbor that we knew, and then there was a bunch of people because we'd spent like 8 years working on these different sailing events in Bermuda. We'd go there like once a year. So ashore, like in the bar at the St. George's Dinghy Club, we knew the bartenders there, and it was just really nice, a really comfortable feeling when you get into a new place and people know your name. It's really cool. But I wanted to share. You mentioned a second ago the surfing stuff and big wave surfing, and I have an interesting story. We did last year, our last trip of the season, we sailed from the south coast of Portugal out to Madeira and back again.
Oh,
and
man.
part of the reason I wanted to go to Madeira was I had just finished reading this book. What was it called? Called Barbarian Days.
Oh, yeah.
The surfing
Awesome.
memoir. It won the Pulitzer Prize. Yeah, one of my favorite books.
Yeah.
And I'm not a surfer, but I really relate to that culture because there's a lot of similarities. But anyway, in that book, a large section of the book talks about this little surf village called Jardin du Mer that had like a really awesome big wave that these guys had discovered.
Yeah, that's right.
And I was like, we were in Madeira only for like 3 days. And I said, Mia, this village was like on the opposite side of the island from where the boat was in the marina. But I was like, Mia, we got to go out there and just check it out. I read so much about this. I want to see it. So we rented a scooter and very quickly learned that like the Madeira is a hugely mountainous island. And there's a big highway that traverses it that you can get pretty quickly across the island. But the highway is it's basically a series of bridges over these ravines and tunnels through the mountains at like 65 miles an hour, which is untenable on a scooter. So we had to take these back roads that like wind their way in the mountains. It was spectacular driving, but it took us like 3 hours to get to this village. But we made it there and we wandered around and got to kind of relive some of the stuff that he talked about in the book. And it was just a really cool little mission for me to like say that I sailed to Madeira. I got out to this surf spot. Even though I'm not a surfer, I got to see it. And I went back and reread that section of the book with that picture in my head, which was really neat. So completely unrelated story, but it was a cool story.
And I remember that kind of chapter, that part of the book, which is I think he almost got like killed out there. Like he went out on a huge day, and there's really hard to get back in, and really struggled. I think that was the spot out there.
Yeah, they actually had to paddle down to like a neighboring village, and you can see that neighboring village from where we were, and it's far, man. It's really? Like holy smokes, and there's no way, like there's no roads that connect those two villages. It was pretty gnarly to envision that.
No, that's way cool. So I'm curious too. So kind of back to Mia and the cold weather stuff. You know, you have the Swedish blood, and so you're super used to the cold, and I absolutely get it. One of the neat things that I was just looking at all the cool content you guys have, and there's this kind of special place that you've been, which is 80 degrees north, which is that line. I mean, what's the significance of that? Is that kind of like the sort of top of the world, or what is it up there?
Yeah, so it's a place called Svalbard or Spitsbergen. People may know one or even name, and it's north of Norway. It's about 600 miles, right, from northern tip of Norway, north up. And we have heard about it because a lot of our Norwegian and Scandinavian friends have been there or talked about it. And when we lived in the U.S. back maybe like 6-7 years ago, we actually bought charts of the place because that was a place that we wanted to go to, and we were hoping to go there on our previous boat, but just it just didn't really work out. And then we said, when we bought the Isbjørn RS-148, that was like a mission. So we planned about 3 years prior to that to make it work and have a big refit and plan the calendar to make it up there. And it's a beautiful place. It's about 2,000 people living up there. And it's snow, ice bears, walruses. Just a really, really amazing place.
The significance of 80 North, like Spitsbergen, because of the warm water of the Gulf Stream, the whole reason the west coast of Norway is not frozen is because of this. The tail of the Gulf Stream winds its way up the Norwegian coast and keeps that part of the world relatively temperate. And
Yeah.
the very tail end of the Gulf Stream makes its way all the way up to the west coast of Spitsbergen. So it's ice free in the summertime. In the wintertime, it freezes. And it's basically as far north as you can sail in open water. I mean, unless you have an ice reinforced boat. So to get up, we could have made it even farther north, because the pack ice that, like, the whole North Pole is just frozen ocean year round.
Yeah.
But the edge of that pack ice moves north and south depending on the currents and the wind and how bad the winter's been, this and that. So when we were up there, one of our goals was to try and sail up to the edge of the pack ice, but it was really far north. Obviously, the ice cap's shrinking every year. So we got up to 80 degrees north, but the edge of the pack was up at like 82, which is another 120 miles even north of where we were. So, but 80 north is it's a meaningless line. It's just a line on the chart, really.
Right.
But it is significant because it just feels like a big number. You're only 600 miles from the North Pole.
Right.
It's above the landmass of Spitsbergen, so there's no land north of that. It's just frozen ocean all the way to the North Pole, and it's just one of those kind of milestones. And it was funny because we have electronic charts on the boat in addition to paper charts, and on the electronic charts we had, the chart just ended at 80 north. It was just gray blank space north of that. So that was kind of a cool feeling. Literally sailed off the map.
It's ice free up there, but it doesn't mean it's warm. It was like, I think the average temperature was about 2 degrees Celsius, which is about 35 degrees Fahrenheit. So it was, even though it was summertime, we had the snow on the boat on June 12th. We had a fresh layer that we woke up to. But it was a lot of layers. So I never felt cold, but it was thanks to a lot of long underwear and down jackets.
Yeah, I mean, that's one thing. It's funny when I think about sailing and going on long voyages, which is kind of on my next kind of phase of life. But I think of nothing but warmth and surfboards, and it's funny, like when I was looking at your guys' pictures and just putting myself in the shoes of you and the crew you bring, it's like there's a lot more prep. Well, I shouldn't say a lot more. There's a lot of special prep required to go in those areas where it's cold and, you're going to have snow and everything. I mean, so how does that impact sort of packing for your trips? I mean, if you're going to be in the Azores is one thing, but if you're going to be, Newfoundland or something is different. I mean, is it different gear? I mean, for the deck and for just, the clothing and everything. I mean, how does that work for you guys, packing and everything?
Yeah, most people that, like, if they say they're going to sail around the world, it's in the tropics. It's shorts and t-shirts for most of the way, and you can do that, and it's great, and a lot of people do that, and I'm interested in higher latitudes as well. I want to do it all. But as far as packing and stuff, I mean, there were no special modifications we did to the boat because we weren't going into heavily iced in areas. There was some glacial ice that we had to avoid, but the boat was outfitted as any well-found ocean-going boat would be. The only difference is we added a heater, which came in handy. We didn't use it all the time, but it really took the edge off when you came down below after a 4-hour watch out in the cold. And it dried stuff out. That's the biggest challenge, is keeping everything dry, because everything gets damp, because you get it's warm inside the boat, cold outside, so you get condensation on everything. And that was a constant challenge. But it's basically packing like you're going on a ski trip. And imagine, like, if you've ever gone skiing, you're sitting on the chairlift, and that's when you're the coldest because you're not moving, you're just sitting there. And that's what it's like. You're basically, when you're on watch for 4 hours, you're basically sitting on a chairlift for 4 hours and maybe steering the boat or letting the autopilot steer for a little. There's not a lot of movement to keep you warm. So it's a bone-chilling cold by the end of your watch. But like Mia said, we never felt cold. We felt prepared, but we had to have, like, because of the wetness, you had to have like 3 or 4 different pair of gloves, and we found that you just, when you were handling lines or sails or something, you couldn't wear, there was no pair of gloves that worked to allow you to have the dexterity to do what you needed to do. So you just had to take the gloves off temporarily and deal with it, and then put gloves back on to warm up again. And like, we had special helming gloves. If you were driving the boat, we had these rubber gloves that the fishermen use up there that have like synthetic sheepskin on the inside and the rubber on the outside, so they're completely waterproof, and they're great when you're driving because the wheel tended to be wet and stuff, and it kept your hands dry. But then if you're just sitting outside, I wore basically just like ski gloves, but as soon as you start doing stuff with the ski gloves on, they got wet. So it was a constant struggle with that, but it wasn't really any different than layering up for like a ski trip. And then we had The only other difference was we had these survival suits on board. They're basically call them Gumby suits. It's like a really thick neoprene kind of onesie that allows you, if the boat was going to sink, we'd all climb in our survival suits, and it basically allows you to be in the water for like 6 hours when the water's like 35 degrees or something. And that's a worst case scenario situation, but it could save your life, because if you go in the water with nothing on, you're not going to last real long.
Yeah, dead on. So, kind of switching gears a little bit. I mean, really what we've been talking about is the two of you sailing around a good chunk of the world in warm and cold, and I'm sure you've been through some big seas and everything in between. There's a level of just knowledge and experience that you guys have, right? And I'd love to hear sort of how you both got started back as kids, being introduced into the ocean. And you have on your website, it's a great story about the both of you and how Andy kind of got me into it. But I'd love to hear, I mean, maybe Andy, if you start, I mean, it sounds like you come from a maritime family. Your father was a master mariner in the Coast Guard. It sounds like he's still active with you guys out at sea and everything. But talk about your growing up and being introduced to sailing in the ocean, and how that kind of then folded into meeting Mia and kind of getting her into the obsessed as well.
Yeah, she didn't really have a choice, but she stuck with it. But no, to be clear, my dad it's called a master mariner license, a captain's license. He never worked in the Coast Guard or anything. He's a businessman. That's where I get him and his brother run a couple restaurants back in Pennsylvania that my grandfather started. So that's where I get the entrepreneurial side of things from my grandfather and my dad and my uncle. My dad's been a sailor since he's in his 20s, but he's done a few professional gigs here and there doing some boat deliveries and stuff. But he, just to be clear, he wasn't doing that as a living. But no, I mean, my mom and dad started sailing when they got married. They were both in their mid-20s. And they kind of just always had boats when I was growing up. And I grew up in Pennsylvania on a horse farm. So we were also far from the ocean where I grew up, but we grew up water skiing on a river nearby the house. So it was always around the water in that sense. But then in the summertime, we'd go down to the Chesapeake, which was about a 2.5-hour drive, and spend a week or weekends and stuff just sailing on the Chesapeake with my sister, my mom and dad. And then the biggest thing for us when I was growing up as a kid, my mom and dad took us out of school when I was 9 and my sister was 7. I would have been in 4th grade and my sister 2nd. And we took the boat from the Chesapeake down the east coast of the U.S. over to the Bahamas, spent several months in the Bahamas, and then came back again. And that was my 4th grade. We were homeschooled on the boat. That was 4th grade for me. So that was the first really big experience of living on and with the ocean. That, we were living on the boat for 9 months, and that was life. My dad and I in the Bahamas would go out spear fishing and go collecting conch, and that's, we'd clean it on the beach and eat it for dinner on the boat. And it was just a really cool lifestyle that, they exposed us to that at a very young age. And I'm 100% positive that experience is why I am where I am today and have such a close relationship with being around the water. But more than that, I think, because my sister didn't, she had the same experience, but she still enjoys sailing with us recreationally. But she's a teacher now, and I think the bigger picture philosophical thing that we got from our parents that I like to say is my mom was the philosopher, my dad was the practical guy. And I even have my mom passed away in 2012, but I have her handwriting tattooed on my wrist, and it says, "Hold fast to your dreams." And that's what she'd written to me in a note that she gave to me right before I left on the backpacking trip where I met Mia, which I'll come back to in a second. But where I'm going with this is my mom said, basically, her philosophy was do what you love and the money will follow. And my dad's then was on the practical side, we don't care what you do, but whatever you do, try to be the best at it. And then you'll always have something to do. If you're the best at whatever you do, there will probably be a niche for you to fill. Yeah. So those two pieces of advice are really powerful. And I think it's the reason that I pursued the sailing thing and why my sister pursued her teaching career. She's a reading specialist. And she's truly found her calling. She's created a reading program where the kids get to read to animals on this little farm that the school has that she works at. And it's like made for her. It's perfect for her. And I think the bigger sort of takeaway isn't why I got hooked to the ocean, but more that I identify and pursue my passion, and so was my sister, using those two pieces of advice. And it just happened to be sailing for me, and it happened to be teaching for her. And but that identifying that in the first place was really a powerful thing. And that notion that you can follow your passion and be successful if you work hard for it.
Yep.
And you know, when I graduated college, then I went a more practical side of things. I went to Annapolis because I always loved that town. Got a job as a deckhand on a schooner, and also was working in their, it was a small family-run business, working in their business office a little bit. And that was probably the first time I realized that I could actually make a career out of sailing. I always loved it, but I didn't have a clarity of like, okay, I know what I'm going to do now. And that was the first experience. It was called the Schooner Woodwind. In fact, if you've seen the movie Wedding Crashers, there's a short sailing scene in that movie.
Yeah.
The Woodwind was used for that movie. So it's a pretty well-known boat. But
yeah.
And I'll let Mia tell her story. But yeah, we met, and she had never sailed a day in her life before we met. So I'll give it over to her.
Yes, I have a little bit of a different story, but I grew up in this countryside of Sweden, very happily in my family. But then the first time I ever stepped foot on a sailboat was in New Zealand when I met Andy. He invited me and my friend who I was traveling with, and that was the first time. And I was 21 at the time, so I kind of came to sailing later in life. But I've always been, I think sailing, ironically, what we do, sailing is a big part of it, but it's also, it's a bigger picture than that. I always liked being active. I always liked to travel. I like to live a kind of a simple lifestyle growing up. And I think sailing was just a different outlet for that so it's not just so much about the sailing, it's all about the traveling and what we do.
Yeah.
I think that is more what.
Yeah, I get you. And then to that, Mia, as well. I mean, there's when you grow up around the water, on the water as a kid, and you maintain that over time into adulthood. You see the ocean, you have a lot of time to develop your comfortability or your level of comfortability in the water, and big water, small water, whatever that might be. And sometimes adults who come into it a little bit later in the game, as you mentioned, sometimes it's challenging because you're not used to the ocean. You didn't grow up getting beat around. And so how is it for you? Like, as in your young 20s, which you think you're bulletproof and you're gonna live forever still, even then. But I mean, how was it? Like, you're getting on boats now, and then at some point you hit some bigger seas. Like, how was your kind of evolution of comfort in the ocean?
I think it was a pretty steep learning curve, but me and Andy, we pretty quickly, I first visited him in Annapolis, and we stayed on his dad's boat, and we very quickly realized that we wanted to have our own boat. And when we bought Arcturus, it was a Allied Seabreeze from 1966, a beautiful little classic. So we restored her, and the dream quickly became to sail her all the way to Sweden. So
cool.
we worked up to that, and we went on a lot of deliveries. And I never feel like, the funny thing is I just got my yachtmaster over the winter. And before that, I had taken no specific training. I have taken no sailing classes. But to me, it's more about, I learned from Andy, I realized afterwards he's a fantastic coach. But I think just living on it and being on a boat is the best way to get into it. And the more sailing we did, we constantly extended the comfort zone. First we did just one overnight, and then we did a few more overnights, and then eventually we crossed the Atlantic. And all of a sudden it was just, I felt super comfortable with it. But I have to say, in the beginning, I got pretty seasick the first couple of days, but knock on wood now, I haven't been seasick in like 5 years. And I think that truly comes with a little bit of experience. I'm not getting as anxious as I did the first couple of years. So that's a big relief now that I don't think I've been seasick now for, like I said, 5 years.
Oh yeah, no, that's awesome. I mean, just sometimes the anticipation of like maybe becoming seasick is almost just as bad as being seasick, because it's so distracting, Yeah,
you can see people sitting there. I was gonna say, you can see people sitting sometimes thinking, "Am I seasick? Maybe I'm seasick. I'm not sure if I'm seasick. I think I'm seasick," and then it's just that downward spiral. So definitely getting less anxious is helping.
I know. And I think we all have horror stories of being sick, and I have a couple good ones too. I mean, it's just, what's classic about it, and this is just a side topic, but it's funny. I know some pretty big badass guys who don't do a lot of stuff on the ocean, but that gone out with them in the water. And on land, there's a lot of bravado and like, that's cool. That's just how they operate. They're good dudes, but they're just big kind of burly guys. But it's so classic, the humbling experience of being seasick for somebody, because basically it's the greatest equalizer there is, where it doesn't matter if you're the biggest, baddest dude or girl in the world, you're curled up in the fetal position on a bunk, and then it's so humbling afterwards. It's a pretty funny experience to have and see sometimes.
It is, and it's funny. We compare what we do to like going on a mountaineering expedition sort of thing. It's like that level of gnarliness. It can be anyway, but.
Yeah.
I tend to think that ocean sailing on one level is even harder than a serious mountaineering expedition, because at least there you can pitch your tent and stop. Like
right.
The mountain's not moving. Like you're never stopping. You never can get off the roller coaster when you're at sea on a boat. Even if you can physically stop the boat and heave to and ride out some bad weather or whatever, it's still constantly in motion. And
yeah,
you just gotta become one with that. And if you fight it, you're just going to be in for a long fight, because there's no getting off the roller coaster. And it's, but I will say that the longer the trip, the better it is for seasickness, meaning like everybody will get over it. Every body adapts eventually. And sometimes it takes longer than others. We've had guys in their bunks for 3 solid days. Yeah. And one guy in particular, thankfully it was an 8-day passage. So he got to enjoy the second half of it. And really enjoyed it, because he had this horrible experience in the beginning, and then realized how good it could be, and really enjoyed it at the end. So I tend to tell people there's a great quote from the movie Vanilla Sky, where the one actor comes in and says, "Without the bitter baby, the sweet ain't as sweet." And that's 100% true.
I know. It's super true. So, there's another really cool aspect that I'm curious about, kind of back to where we started, like not so much philosophical, but almost maybe more spiritual, and this is a fun theme that I love to have, and just chat with people who maybe they're endurance athletes who paddle a paddleboard between Hawaiian Islands for 24 hours, or maybe it's somebody who free dives to 300 feet or hunts fish and everything in between, or sails across the Atlantic. There's this like connection we all have that you recognize, not every minute of every day you're on the water, but every now and then there's something special that happens, and it could be a sunset, an animal, who knows what. But for you guys, kind of 2 questions in one. One is like your own, I don't know, the spiritual, call it that. There's a lot of different ways to phrase it. Just the connection that you feel being out on the ocean. You're out there so much, you're seeing such amazing things, but it never gets old, for one. So just relate that. What's that like for you guys? And what does that mean to you as another really neat aspect of this life that you've built for yourselves?
Yeah, great question. I love talking about this stuff as well. My mom was a deeply spiritual person in the universal sense. Like she was not religious at all, but was very spiritual in the natural universal sense of the word. And I've kind of inherited that from her, I guess you could say. And I enjoy see how I can frame this. There's one specific story I want to tell, but in general, when you get to travel by sailboat, you're going at such a slow pace. I tend to frame it as, it's not a slow pace, it's like a human pace. We weren't meant to travel across an ocean in 6 hours in an airplane. Like, right. People don't think time travel is a thing. Well, it is a thing. Get on a transatlantic airplane and it's a freaking time travel. Like it is. It's as close as we're ever going to get anyway, especially when you realize it takes 3 weeks to get across that same body of water at a pace that's more natural. Even this Greta, who just did the transatlantic to go to the climate summit. I mean, it took them 2 weeks and they were on a freaking race boat.
I know.
So
that's awesome.
It makes it on a scale where you can actually pay attention, and in a combination with the speed and the disconnected nature of being out there, you get to pay attention to, I think, signs in nature that are around us all the time, but that nobody's paying attention to. So, we talk about, offshore, you can literally see stars all the way down to the horizon. You've never seen a night sky like you've seen it in the middle of Atlantic on a clear night. We've had several occasions where we've mistaken a bright star for a ship's light because it was that low on the horizon. It was just rising
Wow.
or just setting. And it's hard to explain what that's like to people. And my other favorite natural experience offshore, you get bioluminescence in the water, which is like the plankton that
Oh
glows in the
yeah.
dark and is
So
disturbed.
cool.
But the coolest part about it is you get a really dark night with no moon. You got a lot of stars out, and then you'll usually hear them before you see them, but dolphins will come up in the middle of the night, and you'll hear them spouting or something near the boat, and they tend to hang out with the boat for a while. But when you have an area of particularly bright phosphorescence, the dolphins streak through the water like torpedoes. They have this comet trail that goes for like 30 feet behind them as they're swimming underwater. And it is, every time you see it, you don't see it very often, but when you do see it, it is just the most amazing thing you've ever seen in your life. Just that,
Yeah.
am I hallucinating, or am I
Right.
really
Right.
seeing that? It is unreal.
Huh.
And then on the really more spiritual side of things, when we were going up to Spitsbergen last year, my mom always read omens into things, like signs in nature and stuff that
Cool.
that meant something to her. And she was particularly curious and interested in like bird feathers, especially hawks and eagles and sort of the more majestic birds of prey. And there was a little island that we were anchored next to right before we left to go on that final jump up to Spitsbergen, that last 600 miles offshore. And Mia was on the beach and found some golden eagle feathers on the beach and thought that I would appreciate that. So she brought them back to me. I tied them up and hung them at the nav station. I thought, like, that's a really good omen that our last stop here, we found these eagle feathers. So I hung them at the nav station as sort of a good luck token. And they saw us safely to the Arctic and back out again. And they'd stayed on the boat the whole summer after that. And then going across the Atlantic in January, the feathers were still there. We're now in a new season in a new part of the world and a safer part of the world. And I had gained a ton of confidence by doing that trip up north. And we were at sea on my mom's birthday, which would have been February 1st. And I was on watch in the middle of the night. And we always like to set the watches up so that Mia or myself can have an hour or two at night when everybody else is asleep. So we just get to enjoy that solitude and that, that's the most spiritual time of day out there. And that's the reason I do it. So we set the watches up so we can get that time. But I was, reminiscing, reflecting on what my mom meant to me and all this stuff on her birthday. And I thought it would be appropriate. Like, I felt like those eagle feathers had served their purpose. I was like, you know what? I'm going to cast these off into the ocean because this feels like the right thing to do, to acknowledge my mom's birthday and say, thanks for serving your purpose, and off you go. So I did that. And of course that it got me super emotional. I spent the next hour just crying my eyes out, laying down while the autopilot drove the boat, watching the stars, and just, that was a really, really special moment for me. And it got even more special because the next day was kind of an overcast. It was still her birthday, but it was after the sun came up. And it was kind of overcast, rainy. And I was on watch again alone, not because everybody was asleep, because it was pouring down rain and people were hiding. And we had this big minke whale come up next to the boat. And it kind of hung out with us for a while and would dive down under the boat and come up on the other side and dive down again and come up on the other side. And I didn't say anything to anybody for a while. I just wanted to enjoy the whale's presence on my own. And then I said, all right, you guys got to come up and see this. And as soon as everybody came up, the whale, they got a glimpse of it, but then he kind of went away. And then everyone would come back, would go back down below again, stay out of the rain. And then 20 minutes later, the whale would come back. And I had the strongest sense that whale was like saying hi to me from my mom, like acknowledging that thing. I just had this super powerful sense that whale was for me and me alone. And that was such a special experience. And especially because it was like midway through the trip, we'd been at sea for probably 10 days by then. And we were really into the rhythm and really, I like to say once you get that far into a trip, it could go on forever. You just into that rhythm and it's just, you're at one with being at sea. And I don't know, that was a special moment.
Yeah, I love that. And what's cool too is when you let yourself acknowledge those things, and you can choose to share an interaction or a moment that you have on the water with an animal or whatever it is with others or not. It might just be for you. And what I liked, I didn't used to do that. I used to maybe have some sense of something when I was underwater, on the water, or whatever, and just kind of hold it to myself because you're not sure, maybe that was when I was younger. But now when you let yourself acknowledge that what you just witnessed or what you just went through and what it meant to you, like you just said, I really strongly feel that was, this whale was, basically on behalf of my mother just interacting with me. And that's that's awesome, and it's so cool when you let yourself actually acknowledge those things, that is a possibility and it's a reality, and there's so many epic stories, especially with the marine mammals, and the seabirds too, like of just people I've had on the podcast when times are tough or they're down or it's an emotional moment and something like that happens exactly right then and there, it's epic. And now, what about for well, actually, let's ask Mia. Mia, I'd love to hear your perspective too, being out at sea and having these types of moments for yourself.
Yeah, I'm trying to prompt Mia to tell the story. We were on Arcturus, the first ever passage offshore when it was really scary and you had the dolphins come up next to the boat. Do you want to tell that story?
Yeah, we were, so me and Andy, when we first had gotten on tourist, we got the good idea to take her all the way down to Florida, the two of us, and down the ICW. But we very quickly got sick of the motoring down the ICW, so we were going to do a 3-day hop going offshore. And the first night was pretty scary because there was a lot of lightning and we didn't have an autopilot, so we had to hand steer and got really tired. But then when the lightning stopped, Andy went down below to sleep, and the dolphins came up and they swam with me for probably 2 hours. And
No
it
way.
truly felt like they were, comforting me. And every time when I'm out sailing and starting to feel a little anxious, there's dolphins coming. And it always feels like they're coming to say, like, hey there's no problem. We're out here. We're taking care of you. We're keeping an eye on you. So that always makes your anxiousness go away really quickly. So that's always, I think, magical. But to me, one thing that I truly got to appreciate this year on the transatlantic was the stars. And it was really neat because 2 or 3 of the crew who were with us were really into stars. And they got so excited because they got to see so many constellations they had never seen before. And just having someone with you who knows, it's nice to look at the stars, but it's even nicer when you can actually connect them and see what they're like. So every night then, like Andy said, we have usually trying to get a few hours by ourselves out at night. So me and Andy were laying in the cockpit, just watching the stars and seeing new constellations coming up over the horizon and stuff. And that was really magical. And another cool thing I think that people don't even think about when you go offshore is that a few hours after you leave harbor, you lose phone connection and internet. And on the transatlantic, just being without internet and phones in your pockets for over 20 days.
Oh, yeah.
That is spiritual, I think, in its own nowadays, because when you're having conversations with people, you can't just pick up your phone and fact check stuff. It's more like you can actually, it's not often sitting down with someone in a conversation for a couple hours, just kind of talking about stuff and looking at the waves. I mean, at home, you can go out and lay on the grass and look at stars for 4 hours at night, but I don't do that. I do that offshore. So I think that's
right.
There's a great, it's a snowboarding movie actually, but there's, I think it's called The Fourth Phase. And I forget the guy's name now. I should know it off the top of my head. But anyway, he bought this catamaran sailboat, and his idea was to follow the water cycle from the west coast of the U.S. across the Pacific to Japan and Russia and do some skiing and stuff over there. And there's a very short part of this film that shows them sailing across the Pacific and stopping and surfing at some places and stuff. But there's a one line in there where the guy says about what Mia said with the disconnectivity. He said, I forget how it goes, but it's something to the effect that, like, I could disconnect myself when I'm ashore as well. I'm just not disciplined enough. Yeah. And that's why he loved being at sea, because it was forced abstinence from phones. And that's one reason I love it too, because nobody's disciplined enough to put your phone down for 20 days. Are you kidding me? Nobody's going to do that. Yeah. But you're forced to when you go offshore, and it takes a couple days to get used to that. And once you're into it, you're like, you never want to pick up your phone again until the day you make landfall, and then all the floodgates open.
Oh man, 100%. Absolutely. And I could see too, it just kind of popped in my mind. I mean, how neat it is for you guys to see, I guess in some cases, experiencing all of this with new people every time, and maybe even seeing some transformations within people, out at sea, learning, failing and growing, and just you going through all of it, but also those special times, like you learn from the crew you have too. So how neat it is for you guys to get this worldly set of experiences, perspectives from a lot of different people, and sharing in these. I mean, what you guys are doing is special enough, just the two of you, and then you have somebody coming out who, will look, maybe we'll never go sail that again, but it's something that they'll remember forever. You guys were able to experience that with them. I mean, what a neat thing, another neat byproduct of what you're doing out there.
I mean, that's 100% true. I say that all the time. It's we get to, it would be easy to take it for granted, but we're not allowed to take it for granted because we're getting to see the joy in everybody else's eyes when they get to see that stuff for the first time. So you're reminded every time how special it is that we're doing this. And you're also reminded by the fact that it is, even the shorter trips we do, it is bucket list items for people, and they're taking a big chunk of their time to come and do it, and it really makes us appreciate it. And it gives us a mission. I don't think we need something to do. There's the model in like my dad's generation to go sailing, for the most part, was you worked a career and you retired and bought a boat and went sailing and just went cruising. Right. But that model doesn't exist as much for us anymore in our generation for a number of reasons. But it's also, there's not a lot of young people, and we're not that young anymore, but even 20, 30 somethings out sailing, and we just need a mission for it. And that's been our mission, to share it with other people. And that's made it fulfilling for us much more than just kind of cruising around and exploring. I think we'd get pretty bored with that pretty quickly.
Yeah, that's awesome. That's super awesome. So then what's next, you guys? You got 2 boats. You're in a kind of a nice lull right now where you're able to relax after going really hard for what, 9 months or so. So looking forward, I mean, I know you start your season again in 2020, and I've looked at the trips you have lined up, and just a lot of epic things. But like any big plans beyond that, either trips or goals for yourselves that you guys are looking at?
Yeah, we next year, 2020 is sort of familiar territory for us. That was, like Mia said, that's a year where we're going back to places we've been to before, and a chance to sort of reset before we do something super ambitious. And then 2021, which we haven't published yet, but which will get published in October. We're going to take the big boat to Greenland for the first time. And it's kind of cool because we've been to Iceland now a couple times by plane and once by boat. We've got some friends that have boats there. So Iceland feels like home now, and it's close to Greenland. So we're going to do the big goal of 2021 is going to be go to Iceland and Greenland. And then after that, we do have some really big plans on the horizon, but I can't talk about those just yet. So next time you have me on, I'll reveal that. But we haven't fully committed to it yet. But there's a very big plans on the distant horizon. But I mean, it's on the other side. The reason we got 2 boats, from the beginning, this was Mia and my thing, and it's been awesome. But just like we want to inspire people to come sailing with us and share that, I also, getting a second boat is not a necessarily smart financial decision. There's not a lot of upside. This is not this isn't a tech business that's like scalable here. It's just more hassle and more maintenance and more expenses. And, we'll be lucky to make the second boat break even in the big scheme of things. But one of my goals, and where I put some value on it, besides just the financial side of it, is I want to be able to say, hey, we're looking for a full-time skipper and a full-time mate for the other boat. Because if I was 25 and somebody said, hey, here's a job where you can sail across oceans for a living, I would have killed to do that. And we want to develop people that can share the same mindset that we have across the board. And there isn't a lot of opportunity for young people to get jobs on sailboats that are crossing oceans. There's not a lot that do it in the first place. And we're trying to create a network of people that we can share this with on our side of it. And to that end, we actually have next weekend 14 of our friends and people that have been helping out in the business for the last couple of years, and it will be in the future. They're all coming to the farm in Sweden for a big kind of kickoff here now that we have 2 boats, and get everybody on the same page and inspire everybody to kind of work together on this. We wanted to make it more than just Mia and I, because we feel like we have more to share and want to kind of provide opportunities. So that's the next big thing, really, is expanding this beyond just the 2 of us.
Yeah, that's awesome. I think that's really cool. It's like, you could just focus on growing the business for the business sake, but what you're really talking about is growing it for the sake of others and providing opportunities for somebody who's out there, a younger person who might not ever have the opportunity. And I mean, there's a lot. I just think that's really, really, really cool, man. So, and both me as well. I mean, that's awesome. So I admire you guys for that.
Yeah, thanks. Sometimes I wish I hadn't taken the plunge when I'm really stressed out about stuff, but I'm pretty optimistic today. So you caught me on a good day. No, it's gonna be really cool. It feels like the right thing to do.
Yep. Good deal. Well, hey, I really want to say thank you to you guys for taking your time and sharing all your stories, and also just for doing what you're doing, and getting so much content out there. And I will put in the show notes for folks listening. It's 59-north.com, and I'll put a bunch of links. And it's just, I found the podcast yesterday. I don't know why I didn't even know about it before, and listened to a few episodes on my drive to work. And it's just cool. I mean, you have great people. You speak really well. You guys share so much, your blog. I mean, anybody listening who's interested, whether you sail or not, doesn't matter. I mean, just the stories you guys tell and the experiences, and for folks who are more technical, the gear and the different techniques and everything, it's all there. So, I mean, you guys, thank you for sharing all that with the world.
Yeah, thanks, man. Thanks for having us on.
Thank you.
My pleasure. All right, you guys. Hey, thank you so much. And we'll be hopefully talking to you soon.
All right. Yeah. Thanks, Josh. Good luck with all your stuff.
Thank you so much, you guys. Take care.
Hey, do.
All right, everybody. Thanks so much for listening to another podcast episode. Can't do it without you. And so thrilled to have you here supporting myself and the podcast and all the guests continually. Always appreciate a positive rating on your podcast app, whether it be Apple Podcasts, iTunes, Spotify, you name it. Just helps grow the podcast and spread awareness. So thanks for that. And then any social media mentions, always super appreciative. And if you know somebody who you think would be great to have on the podcast to share about their ocean life, please hit me up. I'd love to chat with them. Or if you think you'd like to, let me know. Email is josh@thisoceanlife.tv. All right. Thanks, guys.